Last time to sign up for a presentation is next Wednesday, and I realize I haven't done the Calendly. So let's talk about presentations for a second. Will I get these going? We have presentations the last week of class. So May 8th, May 10th, 4 p.m., not a.m., like I did just now, 4:45 p.m., and Friday, 4 p.m., 4:45 p.m. Make sure that I did the right thing. So you can sign up for a time. I do them as 10-minute intervals, so we can do 4 per lecture. They don't have to fit in 20 or 10 minutes. They should. After 10 minutes, I might cut you off depending on how the timing is going. But I want to make sure we don't really cram them in. So 4 per lecture usually works out pretty good. You'd get 10 minutes plus about 2 minutes to transfer between presentations. Tends to work out. And then we have the final exam day, which is May 19th. Damn it, Jesse, why didn't you add that in? I don't want to be doing this during lecture. My session expired. By the way, the Hub Student Center looks so bad. It actually looks pretty good on the faculty side. It looks like it used to. It just gives me the information without trying to be mobile friendly. Let's see. Web applications, Friday, 3:30 to 6:30. Oh, right after my 116. 3:30 to 6:30. So those of you who want, if you do want this one, times are going up right now. 3:30 p.m. 6:30 p.m. I got to think, should I not be doing this during lecture? I probably shouldn't be. 4:12. Crap, I forgot how many teams we have. None of y'all are going to know. Shoot. No TAs. I'll update this later. For now, let's do 5:30. I might not have to. As long as that's enough slots, I'll leave it like that. But we shouldn't have to take the whole final exam time. I want to cut it down to just the amount of time that we absolutely need, but I forget how many teams total we have, so I might trim that down unless somebody takes that last time, which, no, somebody's going to do that. Nah, it's fine. It's fine. So there, you just saw it live. Sign up for a presentation time. Finally got those dates in there. So if your team is ready to, you know when you want to sign up, please just sign up for one time slot per team. Not everybody has to sign up and everything. You should know the drill on that one. Just take one time slot. I don't want to have to go in and remove duplicates if a team, 2 members of a team both sign up for a time slot and they got 2 different times for the same project. Just don't do silly things like that. You can cancel your times on Calendly, so if you do find that out that you and your teammate both did, just remove one of them. Common sense stuff. But make sure you sign up for a presentation. After this deadline, anybody who's not signed up for a presentation, I'm just going to compute random times for you. I'm just going to put you wherever, because at that point I assume you don't care. It's probably a fair assumption, I believe, that you don't care when your presentation is, so I'll put it wherever it goes in the schedule. Usually this Monday is one of the last times to fill up. Usually doesn't fill up at all. You know what? I do have to adjust Calendly. Shit. Let me change this. Because we want to make sure that last week is all filled up. Let me change this to 4. And then I'll adjust that to the number of time slots that we absolutely need. So I want to make sure these lectures are all filled up. and as few as possible on that final exam time. This Monday is usually the last one to fill up. So if you don't fill out that form, if no one on your team fills out the form, just expect to be presenting on Monday. And then if you don't want to present on Friday, you don't want to stay an extra week, make sure you sign up for a time. I think usually the Friday, last day of class, is usually the most popular. So if that's the one you want, get it now. Anybody sign up yet? Yeah. Oh, we got 2 teams already signed up. Cool. But that's not what you came here to talk about. So let's talk about reverse proxy servers. So with this, what we want to do is set up Nginx. My plan for today and Monday is today I'm going to give you as much background as you'll need to be able to understand what Nginx and OpenSSH. I want to give you background on all that. It's all going to be through examples. We're going to talk about what all of that means and how to use it, all that good stuff. Then on Monday, I'll give an entire demo on what I expect for AO3 on homework 4. We'll do a demo which is pretty much start to finish what you need for AO3. That's the one where you can follow along and pretty much get AO3 done in lecture. AO3 is one of them objectives, but it might be the only one in this course. I don't know, I haven't really thought about it. Where you can do AO3 without completing AO1 or AO2. So if you don't have your authenticated chat, which if you're doing the 2 LOs anyway, you might as well do AOs 1 and 2. But if you don't get, maybe the cross-site request forgery tokens got you hung up on something, you don't quite want to finish that, you can still do AO3. So this is a homework where I would expect quite a few of you to have AO3, even if you don't have AOs 1 and or 2. So make sure you get your AO3. It is about as free of an objective as it gets in this course, which isn't completely free, of course. But since I go through the demo on Monday, it shouldn't be too bad. So what's a reverse proxy server? And specifically Nginx is what we're talking about, is what we'll talk about today. So let's get into... This is open-ended enough that I'm not sure if I want to use VS Code or my whole project. There it goes. Why did I move my stuff around? I'm going to use VS Code. Don't want to update. I'm going to remember to run Docker this time, because I always forget to run Docker. And let's take a server. This one looks good. Let's take this server that we have set up with Docker. Oh my God, VS Code, stop. I don't need 20 pop-ups when I open a text editor. So let's open this server. Let's take a quick look to make sure it's doing what we want to do. It's returning hello, regardless of what is sent. And then we have some print statements and some stuff going on here that we used for demos in lecture earlier. So let's take this server. It's just saying hello to anybody. No matter what you say to it, it says hello. And get it working with a reverse proxy server. So we did see this kind of briefly in a demo earlier when we talked about architecture before. But we're going to, especially since you're expected to do it now, and we're going to set it up in a different way, let's go through this and make sure we all see what's going on. So we have our Docker file, nothing new here. Making sure, I don't think I've seen this mistake in a while, but making sure you are installing your requirements in your Docker file. Common mistake in this course. Get your requirements.txt in there and install it if that's the way you want to set it up, or just install right here. Students who install locally, and then when they run Docker locally, all the dependencies are copied into the container, so it works on your laptop, and then when you submit, it doesn't work, and you have missing dependencies. Make sure you're installing your dependencies in your Docker file. If you're going through the recommended testing procedure, after you submit to Autolab, download your zip into a fresh directory. You'll catch things like that, so it shouldn't really be affecting anyone when you go through that testing procedure. And then we have our Docker file, which is going to run our database and our app. So this is all stuff you're familiar with. This is our starting point for today. What we want to do is add Nginx to this. Now, last time we added Nginx, what we did was install it manually, and I didn't even show the installation process. You go to the Nginx website, you just go follow the steps to install. I believe it's just one step. You install and run Nginx. We're going to do things differently, and we're going to run Nginx using Docker. So with Nginx, I'm going to create a new directory and create a new Docker file. I have autocomplete in this. And I'm going to create a Docker file for Nginx. I think is just from Nginx. I have to cheat a little bit here. That's IntelliJ. I'm going to cheat a little bit just so we don't have to go through, oh, that was the wrong image name. I believe it's Nginx, but I don't know if I have to specify my version, if the default version is going to work for us. So web server from TCP. Just from Nginx. Cool. Okay, so from Nginx, and I'm actually going to leave this file just like this for now. I'm not going to do anything else. And then in my Docker Compose file, I'm going to add another service for Nginx. I'm going to name it Nginx. Again, it's something I'm not really seeing anymore, but a reminder, whatever you name your services in here, that is your service's name. Well, that's obvious. That will be the host name for that service when it's running in Docker Compose. So when you name this Mongo, or if you name this Mongo the coolest DB, this is what you use as your host name when you connect to this database in your code. I think I'm going to change up my lecture examples on that because I name it Mongo, but it's the name makes so much sense that you can just use Mongo everywhere, and then if you rename your service, you don't understand that it's that this is just a variable. This is just a name that you give it. But besides the point, I'm going to name this service Nginx because that's what makes the most sense. Call it Nginx. And when I specify the build, over here for our app, we did build and then dot. That meant build in the current working directory, which is going to be the same directory as the Docker Compose file. I'm going to put Nginx in a separate file, or in a separate directory, because I'm creating a separate Docker file for it. I believe you can name your Docker file something else and still have it work, but I'd rather keep my Nginx stuff separate anyway. I'm going to put Nginx in a separate directory, so my build is going to be the current directory / Nginx. That's where I want it to look for a Docker Compose file, or a Docker file. And then if I run this in Docker Compose, I'll be running Nginx. It won't do anything yet, but it'll be running Nginx in my build. So I want to get Nginx to actually do something. For that, we're going to need some Nginx configuration. So we saw this configuration. Config. Actually, I don't want that to be named config. Do I want to? I'm going to cheat a little bit more here. Delete. Oh my goodness. It copies the name. I don't want to copy the name of the file. Actually, I don't need to do that. I just need one thing that I never forget, or that I never remember. Server. You'd think that'd be easy to remember. Server. So I'm going to set up some configuration for Nginx, and I'm going to tell it what to do, which is going to be listen on port 80. So this is going to listen for connections on port 80, and I'm going to tell it when to react to things. That's the wrong way of saying that. But I'm going to add location /. So I'm going to say whenever you get a request for anything, any path, any HTTP request that comes to you over port 80, this is what you'll do. And I'm going to set a proxy pass. And I'm so dependent on autocomplete. And without it right now, I'm hoping I got the right things. Because one character off in this configuration file will blow everything up. So I got to make sure I got everything right here. Proxy pass, colon. So I'll double check it. I'll go to my cheat sheet and make sure I got everything character for character right. Proxy pass, and then I want to specify where to send this request to. Proxy pass is going to set up my reverse proxy. So whenever Nginx gets a request, it's going to forward it to my app. And then my app's going to respond to Nginx, and Nginx is going to respond to the user. So Nginx is sitting on my server, but in between my app and the internet. So everything goes through Nginx. A regular proxy server is on the user side. The user goes to a proxy, and then the proxy connects to the outside world on their behalf. This is a reverse proxy because it's on the server side. Users are connecting to our reverse proxy, and then it's connecting to our server for us. So we want to forward this to a specific address. We could do something like we saw when we're in my server configuration. We forwarded it to localhost and then whatever port we were running on. We don't quite want to do it that way here. We could do that, it'd be fine. But we're running inside, I don't know if it'd be fine, but we could do that. What we want to do is contact our app and send this message to our app using the same routing system that we used when we connected to our database. When we connect to our database, we have to say connect to Mongo using whatever name we gave it here. We're going to connect Nginx to our app using the same way. Whatever we name it here, which is app in our case, I'm going to connect to that host on the port that I'm using inside the container. So I'm listening to port 8000 here. Oh, there's not even that many files. I can't get the right one. I feel like this is going to be an equal sign. No, that doesn't look right either. So I'm going to connect to port 8000 here. And if I'm connecting to my app using Nginx like this, I don't need to expose port 8080 anymore. I still can. Actually, it's probably good for testing purposes. I'll still do it here. But Nginx is going to listen on port 80 and then forward requests to port 8000. And then in Docker Compose, I have to map that port as well. So I want my local port, and actually we could use any port. Should I? No, I'm not going to do that. I could just for the sake of argument. But I can. I have to forward my local port. I'm going to forward my local port 80 and forward that to port 80 inside the Nginx container. So whenever I get a request on localhost 80, if I get a request on localhost 80, then I'm going to forward that request to port 80 inside the Nginx container. If I get a request for localhost 8080, I'm going to forward that to port 8000 in my app container. So, and if I get a request for 27017, which by the way, remember, don't do this. But if I had that and I got a request on 27017, that would be forwarded to that port in my Mongo container. That line will expose your database to the world if you don't have any password protection set up. Hopefully none of you will do that. So I have my proxy pass set up. I'm going to check my syntax quick. Oh, I move this over. I keep expecting it to be there. Oh, it's just a space. Okay. Just a space here, and I do need to specify the protocol. I should know that. And then I have the memory of a goldfish here. Proxy HTTP version. Proxy HTTP version. Our app only speaks HTTP 1.1. 1.1. I don't memorize syntax anymore. Neither should you. Memorization is something of the past, thankfully, that we can use our brain power for bigger and better things. So I have my configuration. I'm listening on port 80, and when I get a request, I'm going to forward that to my app using HTTP version 1.1. This is the minimum that we need to use Nginx. We're going to run this. Let me get it spun up here. Servers, Python with Docker. Docker compose up. And I don't think I've built before, but I'm still going to add these because we're going to be rebuilding. So I already have these in there. Build, enforce, recreate. Additional property port not allowed. I don't think so. Ports. S. One character, that's all it takes. You all know that by now, but it's always true. One character off. It's even more painful when it's capitalization. Capitalization error. So this is going to run Nginx. Nginx is going to listen on port 80. Local port 80 is going to be forwarded to Nginx. And then Nginx, when it gets a request on port 80, it's going to forward it to our app's port 8000. So our app should get that request and then respond to Nginx, and Nginx is going to respond to the user. So first, let's test our normal operation, see if this server is working. I'm still exposing port 8080 and forwarding that to 8000. So let's go to port 8080. And hopefully our server says hello. Hello. But if we go to localhost port 80, welcome to Nginx. Well, we get some debugging to do, which is fun. But we definitely did get to Nginx, so that's good. And I probably have one character off somewhere, and we'll find it. It's an accurate portrayal of how your homework will go. Or how, I shouldn't say it like that, how any development goes. We got our request sent. We sent it to localhost port 80. And we got this response with these headers from Nginx. So Nginx sent us this nice response. And notice in my address bar, it's really hard to see. It's really small there. But I typed in localhost 80. But since 80 is the default port for HTTP, it actually removed my port. If you just type localhost, port 80 is assumed. Or http://localhost. Oh, I spelled it wrong. http://localhost. It's going to take me to that same page. So port 80 is the default. It's assumed. And when you go to deploy to real live users, you're using port 80. And for HTTPS, port 443. So when we get to HTTPS, it's going to be port 443. So in Nginx, let's find our typo. So let's go to our configuration. Oh, I know. So does anybody see it, by the way? I'm curious if any of you see the issue here. It's a dumb mistake, but it's your first time seeing this stuff, so I think it'd be harder for you to see. But I wrote this configuration file, and then I didn't do anything with it. This configuration file doesn't go anywhere. It's not read by anything. It just sits there and does absolutely nothing. So we got to actually get it into our Nginx container. So we're running Nginx, but we didn't give our configuration to Nginx. So we want to copy that default configuration, which I forget how path relativity works in this, so we'll just kind of guess a little bit. Default configuration, actually we're not going to guess, I'm just going to look at my other configuration. Find etc nginx conf D. So I want to take my configuration file and I want to copy it into my Nginx directory inside the container at a location where Nginx is expecting its configuration file. And I want to overwrite the default configuration file. So I have to get this path exactly. So I'm going to copy it into my container, which is going to start at the root. If you're getting used to Linux, any command line stuff, the big difference, what's the difference between, well, let's get the whole path and I'll explain it. So it took me way too long to understand this. But I'll still go back to that. But I want to get it into etc nginx conf.d and then default conf for my default configuration. So I want to copy into this exact location, which I had to look up again just to make sure I got the right thing. I know my Nginx directory, but conf.d, I would have forgot that and put default conf right in the Nginx directory if I didn't look it up. So I want to get my configuration into Nginx where it's expecting it. And circling back, what's the difference between this, what I have here, and this without the leading slash? It's a huge difference. If you can understand this sooner than I did, it took me a long time, you'll be doing a little better than I was on Linux stuff. So slash, if you just do slash, which is just like our HTTP request. If you just do slash, that's the root of your hard drive, or of your, not necessarily the hard drive, but of your file system. That's going to be the root directory. Just like a request for slash is your home page. It's your root page of your app. So if you do slash, that's going to be the root directory of your file system. If you don't have the slash, it's going to be a relative directory. So just etc, nginx, whatever, this is going to be relative to the current working directory, which in our Docker file, actually not in this one, because I didn't set up like that, but in our other Docker file, that's going to be the root directory, not the root directory, but a directory named root. Maybe I should rename that. But so this, whatever the working directory is, by default in this container, which I don't even know what it's going to be, maybe it is the root directory, but this is going to be relative to that. So if this is the way I have it set up, then this is actually going to be the path root slash. That'll be the actual full path for that file. But if we start this with a slash, that's going to say, first, before you do anything, go to the root directory and then navigate to this directory, this actual directory. This is what we call an absolute file path. No matter where this is executed from, no matter what directory I'm running from, this is always going to be the same directory because I go back to the root directory and then build my path instead of a relative directory. This is a relative path. This is a relative path, which is going to have the current working directory prepended to it and then navigated to it. So this will depend on which directory I'm running this file from. This is going to be an absolute path and doesn't matter where I'm running it from. It's always going to go back to the root to start. So big difference, that leading slash or not. But if you're anything like me, the first time I figured that out, I'm like, that was my bug, one slash. It's so frustrating. But that's the reason. There is a lot of difference between those two. Yeah.
Would we download Nginx from the website?
Yeah. Yeah, so when you install Nginx, I mean, there are always version differences. I think at one point they did change where their configuration files are just to mess with us. That's the only reason. But I might be misremembering even. They might not have done that. But when you install Nginx, this is where that configuration file will be, and then that's where we look for it when we want to do things. Do I have a terminal open? We can talk about that a little more. History. Of course. I don't believe that. Where'd all my history go? Don't ever do this, by the way. That's not supposed to be showed in lecture. Don't ever change your mods to 777. This was actually testing a student's 312 submission. It suspected a permissions issue. It wasn't the issue, but... Well, I lost the rest of my history. I'm not going to look up my IP address to go in there. I might have Nginx installed on this machine, actually, now that I think about it. So etc... Nope, I don't. I don't have Nginx installed on this machine. But when you install Nginx, you'll have this same directory structure. And that would have been a fun part of the demo. But you'll have the same directory structure. So this is where it's looking for the configuration. Let's rerun this Docker Compose and see if we do get the behavior that we want. So now that we're copying that file, default comp that we built here, and then changing it, put it in, failed to compute cache key, default comp. Oh boy. Not found. Not found. What do you mean? Failed to compute cache key / default conf. Default, I spelled everything right. Oh, I called it config. But it should be called conf. So when I'm copying it into the container, I still want it to be .conf, because that's what Nginx is going to be looking for. All right, so now let's go into our browser. Hello. So now we're routing through Nginx to get to our app, with Nginx listening on port 80. And our server, at this point, we could get rid of this entirely. We don't have to connect to our app through 8080. It's fine if you leave that even after you do AO3. You can leave the 8080. And then when we get to AO3, we'll test with the other ports. But it's only part of what we want to talk about. So we have Nginx set up, but what we've been talking about, I can't even talk today. What we've been talking about is HTTPS. So let's get some HTTPS going on here. For this, I'm just going to grab this command. So we've already talked about that. I don't have to. I don't want to be thinking about that very much. But let's see what this does, what each one does. We're not going to go through all the command line arguments and everything again. But let's go through this and not go through this, but let's run this and see what happens when we actually run this command. Now, if you're on a Unix-based system, which is Mac or any Linux system, this will already be installed. OpenSSL will be installed. On Windows, you have to install it before you run the command. But when we're ready to run the command, we're going to run it. It's going to ask us a bunch of questions. Remember, the only one you have to answer, you absolutely have to, or else nothing works, is the country code, which it calls country name, but it says two-letter code, which is US. I don't even know what happens if you type in I always type US, but if you type in just any two characters, it might still work. I don't know. I always type in US, and then it's going to ask you a bunch of other questions, which you can skip. And it's done. It already did its thing. It's all done. So what did we get from running that? Well, if we look in our directory, we get two files. We get this cert.pem, which is going to be our certificate, all encoded. And we get this private.key, which is my actual private key, which is large. You can see how big these things get. If you write down all these characters, you'll be able to have my private key. I'm not going to use this for anything other than a lecture example, so you don't get anywhere. But when you get this private key file, you do have to keep that private. If you don't keep this key private, you're in trouble. There's no reason to set up your encryption at all. So we keep this private, and I don't let anybody know this private key. And now we need to set up our server to use this. Now, there are a few ways to do this. The first way I'm going to do this is actually not the way to do it in your homework. But I want to show that this is possible, is that we're going to get into our server here, and we can actually write code here, add this to our socket server, add the TLS layer right on top of our TCP layer, and then have our encryption working that way. And oh man, I thought I had this all loaded in memory, but my brain is blanking on how exactly to do this. Let's see if I have my cheat sheet again anyway, but we're going to grab the socket. So the socket server library does use the Python socket library. I don't think anybody is this semester, but you could use the socket library directly, and then you could do this directly. But for our purposes using socket server, we still want to get down to that actual socket, which I'm going to call socket. So we're going to get that socket, and then this socket, I get no autocomplete on it. I need autocomplete. What's up? Oh, and I spelled that wrong. I'm going to call this the socket, so I don't have any duplicate variables, and I'm going to spell it the same way both times. Okay, let's see what I got in here. A bunch of stuff. All right, nobody wants to watch me go through that. Server. Okay. Fun. So I'm going to import SSL. Oh my goodness. Import. It's that point of the semester. Let's just get the summer break. So we're going to grab this SSL library, which actually does TLS, but it's still called SSL like our other ones. And then we're going to I'm just going to copy and paste this line instead of, I'm never going to remember this. Grab our context, which is ssl.ssl context ssl.protocol TLS server. So we're saying we want to use TLS, is what all that's saying, and I can never remember it. And then load our cert chain, and here we're going to get those file names that we have. Let me check the order, the cert first. So we're going to give it the cert.pem. And we're going to give it our private key, private.key. And then add this context to our context wrap socket. Okay. And then with our socket, we're going to take our TLS setup and add it on top of our socket. So with context.wrap socket, we're going to give it the socket. And at this point, we're going to have a secure socket. So at this point, our socket is going to be encrypted. We're going to go back to our server. So we grabbed our socket out of the server, and now I want to reassign it this secure socket. So I'm going to tell my server, hey, that socket, don't worry about that one. Here's a new socket. It's actually the same socket, but just wrapped up in a layer of TLS. And then I'm going to tell the server to serve forever after that. So I'm adding my cert and my private key to a TLS setup, wrapping that around my socket, and then going forever. And guess what I didn't change? Anything else. Anything that has anything to do with HTTP, I never touched it. I just changed the way that I'm setting up my TCP socket server. And then when I run this, one important thing about this is, let's just run it and I'll show you, is that this server only speaks HTTPS. This only speaks TLS. So I can't connect to this server with HTTP anymore because it's always, like the entire socket server connection, the entire TCP socket is going to send messages to the TLS layer next. So it's expecting encrypted traffic. So I can't contact this unencrypted, which is one advantage of setting it up with Nginx the way we're gonna. If something goes wrong with your HTTPS setup, you can still get credit for all the HTTP stuff, all the previous 4 objectives. So with this, my server only speaks HTTPS. Now we can write conditionals in here and try to figure, actually, can we? I don't know how I would even do that, doing it this way and have it speak both HTTP and HTTPS. But we have it running, so let's test this out. If we go to localhost 8080, we're not going to get anything. It's going to be broken because we don't speak HTTP anymore. That was by default an HTTP request. So now, instead of connecting with HTTP, I'm going to slap a little S right here, HTTPS, oh, come on, HTTPS, and connect to the site in a secure way. Let's try it over here on port. This is going to feel weird, but HTTPS on port 80. I have to specify port 80 here. Site can't connect. Error, SSL protocol error, localhost sent an invalid request. Okay, so we messed something up. Server side equals true I didn't set. Looks like the only thing I didn't do. Server side equals true. Oh, and we're running low on time. This better work by the end. This is the stopping point I wanted to get to. We'll get there. We'll get there. HTTPS. HTTPS : localhost 8080. I think I know why that one didn't work. HTTPS. So that first one didn't work because I updated the Docker Compose. I got rid of the 8080. So I can only go through Nginx right now. So Nginx isn't, actually I think I know exactly what's going on. Let me just get my port back here. Nginx isn't speaking HTTPS. So when Nginx gets a request, it doesn't know what to do with the encryption. It doesn't know what to do with that. Additional port, oh, I hit one back too far. So Nginx is still listening only for HTTP requests, so I can't go through Nginx with this setup. I have to go directly to my app, and I remove that port. So that's our bug there. This one, HTTPS : / shouldn't work, but should not give us this error. It should give us this error. Our connection's not private. Our browser is going to yell at us because we have a self-signed cert. Browser says, self-signed cert, you better get out of here. And I'm going to say, help me understand. I don't know what's going on. And I'm going to proceed to localhost and get my hello, which I get my not secure. It's going to warn my users and say, hey, this site's doing something shady. But we can verify we got HTTPS. We are sending an encrypted connection here. And if you're using Wireshark and grabbing these packets, that message hello and the request for localhost, all encrypted, you're not going to be able to see what's going on with those messages. You're not going to be able to see that the server sent back hello. It's all encrypted. which we did get there, and that was my stopping point, and we got there with a few minutes to spare. So any questions on this? Why is it default conf and not default config? I don't know. Why is it? I was just thinking about this the other day. These things irritate me more than they should. Why is this rec v instead of receive? They could have just spelled receive here, and it would clear up a lot of confusion as to what this method's doing. Whenever I hear a student say rec v, I always wonder, like, you do know that's receiving bytes, right? Why didn't they just type the extra letters? Why is it elif instead of elsif in Python? Like, just put a couple extra letters. Especially Python's all about being explicit. Like, it's the word and instead of 2 ampersands. But then they make choices like elif, which make things convoluted and hard to read until you get used to it. But it makes it less beginner-friendly. I don't know why they just delete random letters sometimes. At least we're not as bad as math. In math, where everything's a one-letter variable until they ran out of letters and used Greek symbols. And that's much, much worse. Is Nginx industry standard like Docker? Yeah. Nginx and Apache are the two web servers that are used a lot, and Nginx has, I believe, overtaken Apache. Nginx is the web server of choice these days. Not quite as much as Docker taken over that territory, but Nginx is the leader in that space. To the point where I stopped talking about Apache in lectures. So what do you do with that file if you're trying to make an open source project? Would you just remove the files? Yes. So you would never push these files. You wouldn't even generate these files until you're ready to deploy. So every dev environment, and when you go to deploy, you would have your separate keys. Anyone who's worked on DevU, which is not very many of you, you run that initial setup script at first, and one of the things that does is generate your key and all your private keys like that. But you generate these for each deployment in each environment. Yeah, and you throw it in the git ignore